Ooh, okay. I'm gonna mute myself.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. And Hunter, you were mentioning last week at the end, and I can't do justice to what you said, but my interpretation of your take on Hegel was, to me, very modern. What I'm getting from what you're saying and what I'm getting from Hegel is that Hegel is accepting that human beings can't know everything. You know, that, and I know that's very broadly stated, but it seems to me like so many Enlightenment writers actually thought accumulation of knowledge, that, just tough it out, have perseverance, and the humankind, right? Humankind will be able to unlock the secrets of the universe. And just relatively speaking, a few years later, in this book of Hegel, I think Hegel is more, I don't want to say realistic, but he's more humble to say that we're not going to be able to ever know everything there is to know, but maybe this is a paradox, but that we will learn more if we put our minds to it. That of course we will learn more, of course we will understand more, of course we will things 100 years from now that we don't know now, just like we know things now that we didn't know 100 years ago. So this it's kind of like the striving rather than the destination. And I know that may seem cliche, but we need to keep on trying to discover, to understand, and then to share that understanding with others, knowing that we're never going to reach an endpoint.
Yes, and actually, this is getting onto the. I have an argument that I thought of the other day. Not that I just thought like I'm like this Da Vinci of thought, and I just came up with this idea. This is something these are ideas that I'm piecing together and putting up here. I've been thinking consistently since last Friday about our discussion and about my relative inability to kind of answer the critique that I think, Nevitt, you were really kind of spearheading, which is, look, if you insist on this state of the identity between fighting for ethics and fighting for barbarism or violence or whatever, then every ethical fight or every attempt to be ethical or to do right by a person is just going to do wrong at the same time, right? So then there's just this neutrality to my action that kind of nullifies any sort of meaningful sense of accomplishing anything at all, right? And I have been thinking about that like a lot. Like I've been really thinking, because I've okay. I think that without having to get into the modernist Hegelian perspective at all, I think that the seat of the justification for continuing to play the game, in my opinion, or at least one justification, if I could say that, to be a little more modest, for Hegel would be potentia absoluta, the absolute power of God, or the absolute, the power of the absolute. And a different way to phrase that would be the intervention of the absolute into our experience, in our existence, which makes the impossible possible, and which reorients what it means for something to be eternally true, and basically reestablishes what is the new world event that sediments itself into becoming an eternally true thing. I think that is kind of the structure of a lot of things for Hegel. There is some sort of world event. Making the impossible possible sounds like Kierkegaard. Yes. I can agree. But there's a more structured, I guess, sort of maybe a different structure. No, there's a different structure, I think, to Hegel's notion of the impossible becoming possible than Kierkegaard's. And here it is, in my opinion. Here's what I think, I guess. So I think that Hegel kind of wants to kind of constantly insist on this re-exploration of the way that we're looking at things, right? Like all through the Phenomenology of Spirit, he's just constantly like challenging himself and the reader and the assumptions of the reader and the assumptions that maybe even he is making. And it's sort of like this, it's sort of like Descartes. It's sort of like Descartes pushing deeper into this, like, I'm trying to be as skeptical as possible, you know what I mean? Like in that way. I'm trying to reestablish knowledge from what I absolutely know for certain, right? And I think that Hegel's like sub-Cartesian step in a way is to say that there is a problem of knowledge. This is something real. How do I get from knowledge that there is a problem of knowledge to the real, right? And he doesn't see that necessarily as being guaranteed in Descartes' like, I think, therefore I am. Descartes feels like he's this totally, like, or at least in that position, maybe Descartes is kind of wavering and he works through that in the meditations or whatever, but in the point that he's at, when he says, I am a cogito, he functions as this self-certain self-consciousness, you know what I mean? And it seems that Hegel is willing to challenge that and to say, I'm not even certain that I am a self-consistent subject and that I make sense or that I have a self. It's like Hume. It's like Hume is saying, where's my cogito? I don't know if that's really there. What? You know? And so Hegel is willing to say there is a problem of knowledge, and this problem of knowledge is something that I can count as real in some sense. How do I get from knowledge of the problem of knowledge to the real, right? And I think that his point, I think that the point in a way of a lot of what he's saying is that this problem of knowledge, the whole effort of the Phenomenology of Spirit, this working out, this theorizing and abstracting and experience of the problem of knowledge, I think that is our contact with reality itself. I think that subjective existence is like a marker of this problem being present in reality. You know what I mean? As far as we can say reality exists, which is from a subjective horizon. But my subjective horizon's existence is a present marker of that problem in reality. And I can keep going, but
begging your pardon, but it seems to me Hegel is asserting, to use a more modern phrase, that intersubjectivity is possible. Right? I mean, he is someone who reads what he's writing is going to be able to understand it. Right? That if this is what I was trying to say the last time when oh my God, I'm having a senior moment. Wimberley, grad student, philosophy, liked Borges.
Chase?
Eric?
Chase. When he brought up his father, and what I was trying to get across to him was, don't oppose subjective to objective, meaning like, you know, a objectively, something is objectively true. It exists independent of any human being's understanding or acknowledgement of it. There's not a subjective, there's subjectives by definition, right? There's multiple subjectivities, right? You can speak of an objectivity, but I think from what I was understanding about Hegel was that it's subjectivities. But even though there's multiple subjectivities, we can still understand each other, at least at times understand each other.
Yes, I agree. And the existence of subjectives counts, and this is kind of where he's exploring, like, I guess it's a part of his, the way I'm speaking kind of right now is at least incorporating his kind of his consistent reincorporation of the notion of absolute separation from other people, and not necessarily the state of, but the capacity for this sort of radical, or I guess a threat of solipsism. You know what I mean? Like, I think that there's a sort of a thread going on through, I guess, just German idealism in general, right? Which is this threat of sophistry, and this threat of solipsism, and this threat of these ideas that they are kind of univocally opposed to on different logical or rational grounds. And I think that Hegel is definitely oriented around recognition. And I think that his insight into intersubjective practice is like a key part of like what he's talking about, like all of the time. But for this, in the sense of my motivation to continue to do anything, I mean, not only that, right? But the fact that there are other people out there, I guess, is, for some people, it could be something of an indicator. But paradoxes and inconsistent. The point of saying that the problem is our contact with reality, right, is that paradoxes and inconsistencies and contradictions, like the ones that are in Hegel's logic, they can't be eliminated, but they can be vehicles for us to analyze our ideas on skepticism and on doubt and on despair, and to transform them. And I think that both the mode, maybe not the mode, but one of the motivating aspects of this transformation, and legitimately like motivating, like within the like connotative meaning, like it motivates this transformation, and it motivates us to transform, is this idea in Hegel that we do get a bit of the real. I think that the bit of the real is the problem. Like the problem of getting at the real is the bit of the real. These are real problems in the real, and the real is really problematic, uncertain, and incomplete. And our contact with the real is this space of struggle and of problema and of uncertainty and of incompleteness, right? And I think that is because I think that he's operating within the terms of universal and absolute thinking. And a way that I told this to Travis one time while I was doing the dishes is that, a thing I kind of wish I could say to Nevitt again, which I'm sure I've said before. And he said, what? And I said, the thing with the universals is that there's no such thing as a universal truth. Every universal is in some way overdetermined or broken or stretched to its limit and then exceeded in some, it's always overdetermined by some particular content or is thwarted in some way. And that's what's good about them. That's good about universals, in the sense that there's this rule of sublation in dialectics, right? And the rule is that everything is sublated. All sublation is this universal rule. But then shouldn't sublation also be sublated? You know what I mean? If it's a universal rule, it should turn in on itself. And for negation to negate itself, for sublation to sublate itself in this sort of way, what we get is this trace, this persistence of a trace in all of our sublations of a piece that refuses to be sublated. You know what I mean? There is something that refuses to be sublated, in the same way that there is this universal sublation and this necessary exception to that sublation, which is the thing that refuses to be sublated, the real. We get these pieces of the real. It's impossible to make contact with the real. Paradoxes and inconsistencies cannot be eliminated, but we get pieces of it. And those pieces are these problematic encounters of uncertainty and incompleteness. And that's why you get, and now I'm going to make a turn into where the modernists are going, the modern Hegelians, and they would say that this is perfectly illustrated in their investigations of sex. They would say that sexuality is this concrete inscription of the incompleteness of our subjectivity, and they ascribe to this ontological skepticism, but an incomplete epistemological skepticism in a way, because we get pieces of the real. And they would say that the real, in a way, another way to think of the real is another person, or the other, or beyond all, the impenetrable otherness, and spirit for Hegel is self-recognition in absolute otherness. You know what I mean? It's substance is subject, you know. We engage with the real, with this absolute other, this impossibility all the time. And when we talk about why do anything, because it's impossible to make any progress or to change things for the better, I'm willing to say that I believe in miracles, I guess. And that we do get pieces of the real, and that the absolute does come through in certain contingent little moments, you know, and in our struggles, I guess. Yeah.
Well, I mean, that would be. Do you ever notice if there's that a person articulates more about how they think the world functions or what the world is when they're in opposition to another point of view? It's as if you get more clarity for your own position when you have somebody's other position with which you disagree. And so it's much sharper when you have the tension with it. And that one could argue that it's, well, I mean, again, little d dialectic. I mean, that is a, for lack of a better term, a normal way of this additional knowledge, new knowledge, understanding. And that's why I'm not comfortable with the word knowledge with Hegel, but I think I would feel more comfortable, even though I was the one using knowledge, so I apologize. But I would feel I would feel better with the word understanding. But I don't know if that makes sense to you, Hunter.
Actually, no, I try to, yeah, I don't like to say that I know so and so to be the case, or that I understand X or Y or Z, but that I have an understanding is what I usually say. And that's just for the sake of like modesty, and so that I'm like immune to accidentally being critiqued for overstepping my epistemological boundaries, I guess, you know, my professional limits. But yeah.
But it's connected to, you brought this up, I thought, I don't know when in the past, but Hegel as a philosopher is very open. I don't want to make it sound like he's tolerant of it, but he actually embraces it very, very fully to say human beings have an understanding of the world writ large through different means. So to me, he's very ecumenical in an epistemological sort of way. So a poem can give us an insight. You know, a scientific treatise can give us an insight, right? A work of observation of nature can give us an insight. And that depending on what we're trying to understand, those can all have legitimate, they all can be legitimate. They all can say something little t true.
Yes, and I think that his effort is to separate his saying so that there can be this common social estate of truth, right? Without having to go so far as to admit anything like a relativism, like just like an absolute relativism that says that is your truth, you know, that is your thing. Everybody has their own truth, because I think that he would recognize that there is a force called falsehood. And I think that, you know, I guess the way that I think you would take that would be to say that, like, in a book of lies, there's some truth. You know what I mean?
Remember the old saying, a broken clock is correct twice a day?
Yeah, you know, even a blind squirrel can find a nut. You know, it's whatever. You know, it's sometimes there's that indivisible remainder. There's that unsublatable kernel, and I think for Hegel, I think Hegel would just call that unsublatable kernel the absolute. I think that Hegel would just call that unsublatable thing like the real or the absolute. But I think that modern Hegelians, like neo-Hegel, they would call it less than nothingness. That's what I was trying to talk about. That's what I was trying to get into last time, but I didn't really know how to. And then I just kind of gave up. But it's just this weird logical reasoning line that they have come to that kind of defines this concept that they have found as less than nothingness, which they feel to be the basis for this negative sort of Hegelian insight. But I think that there are a lot of things that Hegel says that don't necessarily, they aren't framed in this sort of negative way, like less than nothingness, but he would say like the absolute. But I still do think that not only three things, not only is there access to the real in some sense in our endeavoring. And so I think that there is a reason to keep playing the game. But secondly, I think that in this section, actually, in this section of reading, I felt like his line of argumentation kind of worked within what I'm talking about in terms of this, like you said, Ed, this openness of the capacity to find insight in whatever pursuit you have or whatever path in life you follow or whatever thing you're fixating on. You know, this openness, this openness, let's just say that, this openness. But I think that openness comes as a result of a catastrophe or a collapse or a failure or an explosion or a breaking down. And I think that there is a section here in the text today that would kind of explain, or maybe not explain, but would explore that idea. Hey, Joseph, just to catch you, because I'm talking about something that I think you might be interested in a little bit. And it's that, you know, how can Hegel say that there is anything like truth and falsehood, right? Like, what's the difference between being true and false? But also say that you can have this open-ended, like you can get an insight from every experience, kind of like there's meaning all around you. The rose of the rose in the cross of the present is reason. It's not, you know, the thing outside of it. It's this thing in the present, and it's always in the present. And it's
that's
reason.
really relevant to the reading, like
well,
extremely relevant.
Yes, and I think that it seems kind of like an antagonism between this notion of like everybody can find insight wherever they look, and also there really is stuff out there that's just wrong. You know what I mean? Like, and I think that the reason is that he has this openness as a concept, but it's not the kind of openness that you would get from just a pure multiplicity. This like totally open-ended relativist multiplicity or whatever. I think that it's not grounded in multiplicity. I think that it's grounded in like a failure in a way. And I think that failure doesn't necessarily produce a boundary box within which the multiplicity can exist, but I think that it abbreviates the multiplicity in its own sort of natural development. I think that the natural development of the multiplicity is one that is abbreviated by the persistence of negativity stemming from its fundamental construction on the basis of a failure. I'm speaking in a very weird way right now, but I really do think that's how I want to say that. So, okay.
Well,
yes, go ahead.
Well, let me,
please.
What I'm not sure if it's necessarily negativity, but rather, I do totally agree with you that Hegel argues that there is an absolute, but we as human beings can't know that absolute in its totality. It's because of our own inabilities as thinking beings that is why we've got these multiple different ways of knowing, of understanding, of having some understanding that have some validity. You know what I'm trying to say? I mean, it's more of, I don't want to use a wonkish term like our own information processing capabilities, but it is something about inherent. We can't get beyond, strike that. There's certain limitations to our understanding of the world because we are human beings. But that doesn't mean we should give up on the effort, that it's very almost noble to continue it. And this is part of the human project.
Yes, and I think, well, for just, I guess, two things. Not only is it noble, but I do think that he really thinks that, like, he's trying to transpose epistemological limitation into ontological impossibility. He's trying to really kind of break down the barrier between my limit as a subject and the fundamental flawedness of reality. And I think he's trying to say that, like, our limitation, he's saying, yes, we are limited subjects. You're right. We're limited in a lot of ways. And we're very faulty and prone to error. But our erroring and our endeavoring and our detouring and our deviating is a vehicle for our interaction with reality, which is a deviation or a detour or a failure, I think, in a way. But I think the Nevedas, so what is the absolute is just like the totality of what is. I think that the absolute, when you say the phrase the totality of what is, I think that concept, I think that there are certain limits to what you can mean when you say the totality of what is. And there are certain implied sort of boundaries to what you say when you say the totality of what is. I mean, I guess, yeah, you could just say like that, like just thinking of it directly, prima facie, the totality of what is. That's the absolute. Yes, that is true. Yes, yes. Yes, definitely. But also, I think that the absolute is not necessarily just this thing that is everything. Yes, I think that that's, hey, wait a minute, actually, that's the failed absolute thing. Every attempt at seeking an absolute seems to fail or break down at some point, and every ontology that seeks to be absolutely correct ends up being overdetermined. Every absolute truth ends up having some exception of some kind. But to say that it's the totality of what is pretty much right. But with the kind of determination that it's like, it's not a pristine, pure picture. It's the totality, yes, but in this weird broken way. But okay. This is my point as to why this is a part of why I think that it's possible to have those two separate ideas of truth, between insight can be everywhere, and there really is something valuable in what we're doing here, and there really is something essential and important, rather than just basket weaving, I guess, you know what I mean? Like the typical kind of hand waving job title or hobby that I think people use to deride other people. So on page 393 and 4, on page 93 and 394, 680, I think. Let's see. I'm just going to go through what I basically think is happening, and it's going to be, I'm going to try to be as brief as possible because I've talked for long enough already. Previous shapes of consciousness are parts of spirit. The moments that we call previous shapes of consciousness, this is in section 680 again, they do not take place in time. The only thing that's in time is the whole spirit. These things are moments, and so they have no actual existence separate from each other. They exist together, but to exist implies a particular whole that they're a part of. So the moments, or the movement of the moments of spirit as differentiating, are a part of this particular whole. And this movement of those moments of spirit as differentiating within that particular whole is religion's coming to be. That's just the movement of the moments of spirit as these differentiating things. That's what he would call religion's coming to be. And he would say there are all kinds of different religions. There's the Enlightenment religion, there's the religion of morality, there's natural religion and so forth. Religion is concept, so on. So on page 394, sections 680 and 681 is where he gets into this. He says the basic gist of what I get as to what he's saying, and this is kind of my argument about this section. This is maybe probably my biggest argument about this section, and that's kind of it actually. But spirit is to know itself in determinate religion with its shape being identical to its essence. So spirit has these movements or these moments of itself as differentiating. It has these moments in this movement, and that movement of the moments of spirit differentiating, that is religion. He calls that religion, is the record or the concrete emblem or remainder of the proof of the movement of moments of spirit as differentiating. That's religion, and the movement itself is its coming to be, and then it comes to be. So in this coming to be, spirit is supposed to try to know itself in determinate religion with the shape being identical to its essence. Spirit, if it's to know itself or to know its movement, if it's gonna try and look back at what it just did, spirit is walking around, leaving behind itself these moments and these effects and these places in its experience, right? And in its wake, or I guess in the process of its moving around, it is engaging in this religiosity or this religion, this coming to be of this religion. And what it leaves in its wake is the structure of the religion itself, the determinate religion. The determinate religion is this evidence of its moving and its moments, and it is the moving and the moment. And so if spirit wants to know itself, if spirit at all wants to know itself, it needs to look back and say, what did I just make? I just made a whole mess. I just made a big religion here. How do I know myself? So the only thing that it has as a clue to learn about itself is this determinate religion. And so its only hope is for this determinate religion to have a shape that is identical to its essence. But the problem is that it takes place in a determinate religion which displays or intuits only that which corresponds to it. And I took this as meaning like, the particular values of particular religions. You know what I mean? Like Christianity having different values and ideas than Hinduism and so on and so forth. And Hinduism, it's like the only thing that spirit has to try and learn about itself is religion, and all it has are these particular religions that all seem to have these different agendas. I think is the point there, is like each religion seems to have a different idea as to what's going on, and they're all just these determinate religions, but they're all I have as this evidence of this movement of spirit in this way. So actual spirit has determinateness in the whole. This is where it gets a little weird, I think. This is spirit's movement in this place of recognizing that it is caught in this determinate religion, or that it has this aspect of determinateness to its religiosity. I'll say that. Yes, I know all this shit is weird, but this is where it's about to get really fucking weird. I'm serious. This is like, buckle up. So, and this actually, I'm just gonna read straight from the text because it's crazy that he said this like this. Okay, and I'm gonna start from, this is in section 681. At section 681, about three quarters of the way down the page, there's a dash and then a line that says this self-certain spirit. Okay.
I'm sorry, what section again was that?
681, my apologies. I hope 681. On section 681 on page 394, there is this thing he said that just blew me away. And it's this. I don't have to read the whole section either, but I'll read to a point. This self-certain spirit and its movement are their genuine actuality and the being in and for itself which corresponds to each single one. However much, therefore, one of the previous series in its forward movement through the nodes of the whole series marked a regression within the series, but then again continued out of these regressions in a single longitude. So we're moving along a line. Still henceforth, it is, as it were, broken at these nodes, these universal moments, and it falls apart into many lines, which gathered together into one coil at the same time symmetrically unite themselves so that the same differences within which each moment itself gave itself a shape all meet together. In addition, it is clear from the entire exposition as to how this coordination of the general directions represented here is to be understood. It is equally clear that it would be superfluous to remark that these differences are essentially to be taken only as moments and not as parts of the process of coming to be. And that, okay.
And what page number is that?
That is page 394. That is the bottom
Oh,
of
thank you.
394 and the very tippy top of 395.
Okay.
Section 681. Here's what I am gathering from that. That is so, it is so weird that he says that, right? Here's what I gather from that. And you guys can challenge me on this, but this is genuinely what I think. This is where I think is the justification for this idea of like, there's truth in every insight, or there's insight in everything, but also like there is a rose in the cross of the present called reason. There is a rose in the cross of the present called reason. And there is such a thing as a difference between truth and falsity and caprice and sophistry versus genuine scientific struggle and analysis. You know what I mean? I think he's really trying to be kind of staunch, but maintain this openness in his staunchness. And I think this is kind of how he does it. And it's by saying, so a spirit has to try and figure itself out to these determinate religions that it leaves behind. But these determinate religions are only talking about things that they correspond to, which is like Christian values or Hindu values, Vedic values, or Brahmanic values, or, you know, whatever, shamanistic values, a particular, and maybe not even a religion, but a religion of morality or religion of enlightenment, which is just talking about these notions of the absolute in matter, not even as a subject or as a power, these religions that are determinate. But the determinateness of actual spirit is the whole thing. The start, the product, the religion, the founding of the religion, or the consequences of the religion and the analysis of that religion in this reflexive way. You know, the actual spirit has determinateness has the determinateness of the whole process, not just a specific religion, but of religion, you know, particular religion, you know what I mean? The concept of religion. But how does it get there? How does it reach this notion of saying the concept of religion, rather than just saying religion or my religion or this determinate religion? How does it say the concept of religion? How does it get there? I think this is what he's saying. And it's that when he says on page 394, when I'm going to just quote it and then go directly from there. When he says, one of the previous series in its forward movement through the nodes of the whole series marked a regression within the series, but then again continued out of these regressions in a single longitude, okay? I think he's describing what I very much think he's describing there. And I say think just because I guess technically it's impossible to be totally certain. But what I think he's saying there is he's talking about the dialectical movement of spirit through this notion of wholeness and particularity, universality and singularity, you know, inwardness and existence. This split, you know, that we've seen a million times, and then it happens all over the place, and that he's going to get back to later. But it's contending with this and moving in a dialectical pattern, right? Yeah, Joseph, it's 681 if you didn't. Sorry, he just put it in the chat, whatever. Sorry, yeah, you got it. Sorry, I just, whatever. So there's this these ones, these terms, these things, these thisnesses, you know what I mean? These things, these ones, these terms, they move forward through nodes in a series and they mark a regression. And what I think that means is that imagine a dialectical movement. Term A, let's say, interacts with term B, and then there's this sublation process, and they move on to term C or whatever, right? And term C has a mark of term A and term B in it. And that mark of term A, I think that it would be possible to say, that's what I think he says. He says marking a regression. It's like this ghost that haunts it. It's like if you learned a lesson from your grandpa. Your grandpa one day told you to always respect women, or to never spit on the sidewalk, or something, to never shout. I don't know. And he gives his life and his essence within the family, yada, yada, yada. This lesson is learned by you. You are taught this lesson to, let's say, always be chivalrous. Let's say you're taught to always be chivalrous. And you see this as valuable. You see this as a valuable and a worthwhile term to hold on, and that it's true. And this is not founded in logic. This is just an example. But let's say you're taught to be chivalrous. You believe that it's true. And then somebody in the modern day looks at you and says, how come you're being so chivalrous? That seems like a mark of regression. That seems like a thing of the past. That seems like a mark of a past term. Another example of this, I guess, would just be, or I guess a different way to say this would be that the first term leaves its mark on whatever is made next. The first and second term will always haunt the next term in some way. They'll always be the marks of their efforts, their truth. Whatever it is that's important that they found, it's not going away, and it's impossible to get around. And so these mark this past truth, or this regression, or this failure or collapse, this idea that held true and that ended up collapsing when brought to this extreme. It marks this ferment of the past, this regression in the succession of the sequence. It's this persistence of past terms, or of aspects of past terms, that marks a regression inherent to the progression of the sequence. So there's already this kind of constant backwards trailing, or what, like this weird backwards movement going on in this forward movement, or this retention of the past. At least,
well, yeah. Can I interrupt for just a second? Okay. I again, I don't know why I have to say it. Feel free to tell me I'm full of shit, but I'm not necessarily thinking it's a regression. Let me give you a real mundane example. I always bring up Moby Dick as an example in the class for interpretation, constitutional interpretation, even though it's not a constitution. And I say, tell me about the novel Moby Dick. And I go, oh yeah, there's a whale, there's a sea captain, and he's really got an obsession. And I said, okay, what does the whale mean? Well, everybody's having this conversation. Nobody's read Moby Dick but me. How can a novel that was not popular when
Did Ed cut out?
Yeah, did Ed cut out for you guys too? Oh,
Yeah, he cut out for me.
uh-oh. Should we wait 15 seconds?
Yeah.
Let me ask a question while we're waiting,
Please,
and then he
please.
can interrupt us if he comes back. So I had a question about regression. So, I mean, I understand what you're saying about the stuff in the past still, or the stuff that's currently going on bearing the marks of the past, because that's the way sublation works. It's both a moving forward, but also a retention of the past.
Yes.
Like I've used that word sedimentation before, but when he says regression, then is he merely saying that, like it's an atavism, like a reemergence of past forms in the present, or is he saying it's actually a regression in the sense of moving back to a previous form?
Yeah, I see what you're. Oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry, can we just stop and say props for the use of atavism. That was amazing. I
Nietzsche
love
used
that word.
Nietzsche
Oh, does
used
he?
that
Does he
word a lot.
really? Oh,
Yes,
that's
he
a
does.
great word. I
We
love
saw
that
in the
word.
gay science a few times. He's always about the
I'm sorry.
atavistic man.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
He's, you know, he fancies himself one. I think maybe I don't know, but he's
Fuck you.
yeah, whatever. Okay. So my point is, and this is, it's not like, it's a kind of modest point. I'm kind of being bombastic about it, but the simple cut and dry point is the term regression is used here because of this visual metaphor he's building of this single longitude, this line, like dialectics is this path of progress, I think this is why he's using regression. I don't think he's saying it really goes back to a previous term or whatever. I think he's using it as this way to kind of point to this way of thinking about dialectics that he's critiquing. I think that he's saying, okay, so it seems like this term moves forward through these nodes in a series that mark a regression. And then he says, but in this, he says, what he's saying, what I think happens is that in this, oh, hey, Ed, you're back.
Yeah, sorry. Did
You're
you
good.
did my example of people's knowledge of at a mundane level, my students' knowledge of the core structure of Moby Dick be a shadow of what Hegel's talking about, these things that linger, this understanding or motifs, or what I'm trying to say,
Yes.
like we talk about the ancient Greeks, the ancient Greek understanding of X.
Yeah, I think it's kind of like Bergson talks about, which is that the past is made up of this, the present. Sorry, the present is made up of the past just flowing and swelling forward and being this plenitude that's just boundless and erupting into the future, and the future is always kind of receding in this weird way. But so. I saw that Nevitt got up, so I'm a little hesitant right now to keep going on my point, but I'll
Yeah,
catch you up.
I would. Let's just give him a couple minutes. By the way, Ed, with Melville, I cannot believe, because I personally find Moby Dick to be boring as hell and didn't enjoy it whatsoever. But Bartleby the Scrivener, one of the best short stories ever created. How he can do that and then have Moby Dick. I mean, I'm sorry, I just couldn't.
I prefer not to.
Yeah.
Yes.
yes,
Yes.
that was the best short story ever written. I'm like, how the hell did this come from Melville?
Well, what I try to do is separate, go to the scene where Ahab's, it's how the novel starts, and then you go backwards. So there's a chapter or a part of a chapter where you go back to Ahab having his leg smashed and amputated by Moby Dick at a previous voyage, and he's struggling with intense pain and could die. And that scene and how Melville describes it is very unnerving. And then a second scene is when Ahab talks to his crew. And the way Melville phrases it is Ahab made his hurt his crew's hurt, his resentment their resentment. And you really, in that scene that Melville writes, you really get, in the earliest time I've seen in fiction, the creation of a totalitarian leader and the politics of resentment.
Yeah, I think, well, by the way, Nevitt, we're just talking about Moby Dick because we were stalling because you were gone.
And I
because
was saying Bartleby the Scrivener is superior, but I had a
Yes.
hard time getting through Moby Dick. I'm not saying it was bad. I just, man, dude, it was the same way with Tolstoy. I loved War and Peace, but at a point I wanted Pierre to just get over predeterminism and then move on a little bit. That was about it.
I get that. I think that, yeah, there's a certain point where you can just be like, okay.
Oh,
But that's what I'm saying. If you could just read those two parts, I think that as standalones, I think you'll be struck by them.
But yeah, I will say I liked Moby Dick. I thought it was really, one of my favorite lines was like, I am madness maddened. I am demoniac. I would slap the sun if it insulted me. Like, he's going crazy. He's going in. doing some really cool stuff in my
From
opinion.
hell's heart, I spit at thee.
Yes, from God, and like, yeah, whatever. I think, really cool character, cool story. That's beside the point. Here's my basic point. Here's all I'm trying to say. I think he's saying regression because that's the term you would use when describing this sequentially. Yeah, actually, and Nevitt, by the way, that's what I'm doing with Wuthering Heights. There are some points that are real boring.
No, not
No,
the
it's-
Bronte. No.
Hey, look, I think it's
I
good.
listened,
Not
I listened
no.
to the I listened to Hunchback of Notre Dame on tape, and there are these long passages where Victor Hugo starts talking about the history of the architecture and all this stuff, which I'm sure some people find fascinating, but like, my God, I do not care about this. Get back to the story. But since I was listening to it on tape, I just start daydreaming about all sorts of stuff, and it's great.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry. Go back to your cup.
Yes, of
I
course.
just I had to say I can't hear Bronte and be like remain silent. I can't do it. Austin, absolutely. Bronte, no, not
Well,
for me.
I'm
I'm
gonna-
glad you enjoy it. If you
I'm gonna-
enjoy it,
I don't know.
awesome.
I'm only 3
can't
chapters in.
do it.
I'm gonna
I
get.
hope you enjoy it. I don't want to sully the waters.
Okay, yeah, that's good. Okay, so
Bronte is trash though, so have fun.
that's that's,
Just saying.
I'm done. I'm sorry. I'm done.
Yeah,
Hegel,
just
Hegel,
totally
I'm sorry.
undermining everything you said.
I gotta be a Jackson and redirect back to Hegel. So
Sure.
anyway,
Okay.
Hegel.
so okay,
Think religion develops like this conversation.
yeah,
my
yeah, yeah. This seems to be like a sort of dialectical tension between the actuality of our spirits and the determinateness of our conversation. Our conversation seems to only be displaying that which corresponds to it, rather than the actuality of spirit, which is what I'm about to say.
Hey, but that's vanishing.
Yeah, I'm about to re-vanish it. I'm about to vanish its vanishing. Watch this. Check this out. Dude, actually, Nevitt, seriously, I didn't think that like it would happen, but like it's not something I do. Like sometimes when I'm trying to make a point, I will just start being like boop beep beep boop robot. Like I'm like the actual spirit has determinateness in these terms as the the luminous essence. It's like and like I'm trying to get through like applied philosophy classes about like whatever, like just bullshit, like the ethics crisis is about abortion and stuff, and I'm like the luminous essence, and there's like whoa, everybody's just so yeah. I like Moby. Me too, Travis. So okay, but without getting too far into that. Okay, so these terms move forward. I want the illustration in my mind was like a line of points, like a series of points in a line on a Cartesian grid, like point, 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 point. The terms move forward through each node. I would say the points are like nodes. So it moves through each node, and I would call each node another term that confronts it. So you have this first term that, and this is a very kind of simplistic rendering of dialectics, but it's going to be kind of replaced with this is what I was saying is weird. This is where it gets weird. And it's that it moves forward through each node in the series, marking a regression or a retention of the past. But the thing is, it breaks at these nodes and becomes, here's the fucked up part, it breaks at these nodes. It doesn't just continue in a victorious march like the world spirit of inevitable conquest. It breaks down at every node, at every dialectical pass. Every term that confronts it, it's breaking down and breaking down and breaking down. And every time that it breaks, it becomes many lines. And I'll in fact go to the part where he says this. Marked a regression within the series, but then again continued out of these regressions in a single longitude, still henceforth it is, as it were, broken at these nodes, these universal moments, and it falls apart into many lines, which gathered together into one coil at the same time symmetrically unite themselves so that the same differences within which each moment itself gave itself a shape all meet together. Here's my point. I think that these many lines meet at one coil where differences symmetrically unite. I think that a different way of wording all of this is that the sequential notion of dialectics gives way, even in the, like, if we humor that that dialectics works in this sequential orientable way, sequential dialectics in its own development and in its own moving, it gives way. It gives way to this explosion of multiplicities. These it's like every time, it's like, imagine like a line of, yes, I think this is a general characteristic of dialectics. That okay, these many lines explode, or this one line explodes at this node, and then they meet at one coil where differences symmetrically unite. What I basically think this looks like, this looks like would be like a Mobius strip. And a better example to get the sense of like a dialectical movement would be something like a lemniscate. And I'll type that in the chat. Hold on. I think this is actually correct, right? Lemniscate. And I've talked about these before, but a lemniscate, and this is actually where I was talking to Nevin about this just a couple minutes ago in this seminar meeting. I don't know if we were recording or not, but I was talking about topology and how I think that topology is a very, very important part of dialectical thinking, to me at least. This realm of appearances and outwardness and seemings and phenomenology of spirit even. I think that this Mobius strip is not just moments in the process of a thing, but is the process of coming to be. I think that the Mobius strip is an illustrate, and that's what he's saying even in what is it? What I said at the end of the quote. It is equally clear that it would be superfluous to remark that these differences are essentially to be taken only as moments and not as part of the process of coming to be. So the Mobius strip illustration, I think that the Mobius strip illustration is just there have been a couple thinkers through time, like Hegel scholars through time, that have kind of marked this pattern in the dialectical process. And that pattern would be this there's a term that I think he uses within, I think it's the lectures on aesthetics, or it might be the science of logic. But in one of those, I might be wrong about that. It might be the Encyclopedia of the Philosophical Sciences or something. But in one of those texts, he says the inside inverted eight as an illustration that he offers. The inside inverted eight. I don't really know what he means by inside, and I don't really know how it's. But I guess it's just it's an eight on its side. You know what I mean?
Well, make the figure eight three-dimensional.
Yes, inside inverted.
Right.
Yes. Okay. Yeah.
Think of a rubber band. Think of a rubber band when you twist it, so it's opposite direction.
Yes. And
I don't understand what that has to do with dialectic.
Okay. I think that the basic. Okay. I think that basically a Mobius strip, let's just to talk about a Mobius strip. I think a Mobius strip intersects and rejoins with itself in this weird way. It's like a rubber band that you twist, you know what I mean? And for you to start at one point on the Mobius strip and then get back all the way to the point that you started at, you can't just move in one circular 360 degrees of angular motion. You have to go along the surface of it, like the fiddler crab illustration on Wikipedia. There's a picture, it's a little GIF of a fiddler crab running across the surface of a Mobius strip. And he says, to go back to the spot that you originated at, you have to go through 720 degrees of angular motion. That's what they said. There's 720 degrees of angular motion. The basic, I guess the basic mode of this interpretation of the Mobius strip, I guess, being like a thing in dialectics, it would be that the Mobius strip is just it's an illustration of the function of dialectics in the coincidence of opposites. The Mobius strip is an illustration of the process of being, the process of the coming to be of being, the coincidence of opposites, and this space where there's no proper difference or identity to be found. There's no proper difference or identity within this sort of Mobius strip conception of dialectics, which is a real thing. And to Hegel, this is a real thing. Okay, so to try and kind of walk through it, if you be willing to, dialectics is the coincidence of opposites, not in the sense the eternal struggle of opposites which produce reality, like yin and yang and masculine and feminine, but it's a twisted space where a straight line eventually intersects with itself perpendicularly. Basically, a straight line will eventually become perpendicular to itself in this way. It's a twisted or convoluted space where a straight line at its extreme coincides or intersects with its opposite. So like fascism, for example. Fascism is trying to be repackaged or rebranded as not necessarily political all the time, as being grounded in inalienable rights or in science, some sort of undeniable science of racial, racial reality or whatever. You know what I mean? It's trying to divorce itself from this politic, right? And it's trying to, and in fact, this is what a lot of people say is a big part of fascism is mythos and the use of irrationalism and this deference to like the myth of the Nordic blood or of the Aryan people as these culture creators, you know what I mean? And it tries to do this in this way that makes it above politics. It's like better than politics. It's not that lowly politics. It's the ushering in of the new nation or of the new people.
Because it's transcending.
Yes.
It's a transcendence.
Yes, it's a transcendence of all the other politics. And so the ultimate political gesture is to deny politics, is to be like, I'm better than politics. I fuck politics. Another way to think about this is that in fascism, the genus or the category of politics encounters itself in an oppositional determination. So, okay.
But also think of Marx when you were talking about the Mobius strip. Nevin, you might remember. I want to do this justice. Marx might have wrote this in the 18th Brumaire of Louis Napoleon. He said something that history repeats itself. The first time is tragedy. The second time is farce. Am I remembering that reasonably close?
I same as you. I remember something vaguely like that, but I don't know for sure.
Well, what I mean is to use that as a very small example of the sense of something in the past doesn't go away, and it's still going to have an effect on whatever is the present, but it's not going to affect it in exactly the same way as when it first appeared.
Yes, and that's why Julius Caesar was a man who lived a very, I guess, efficacious, very, very influential life. Spread his influence and his will as far as it could, and then as a reward, in a way, his name was no longer a particular name, but it was then the Caesar. And it was like, whoa, I could become the next Caesar. Whoa. And it's like this, just on the repetition of the title, it gains this exaltation, this preservation and exaltation, and also this simultaneous like, fuck the original Caesar. I'm the Caesar. The original Caesar, he got killed, but he got killed for good reason, probably. But I'm the guy. My point is, my real point is that this Mobius strip basically is an illustration of a term moving into two extremes two opposite extremes. And those opposite extremes would be like formalism and empiricism or whatever, you know what I mean? Or these two totally opposed extremes that when we investigate them, they seem to have, this is what Hegel is pointing to in the Phenomenology of Spirit so often. He says there's no difference at all. He keeps saying that there's no difference at all. And I think what he's saying is not that there are no discernible particular differences between the 2 points, but that those differences are no difference at all. That those differences occur on the same, in the same term, on the same sort of figure 8 racetrack on the Mobius strip. And these opposed states at either end of the Mobius strip are like the extremes, these violent radical extremes. And the center of the Mobius strip, the point, the meeting point, the suture in the center, I think we could call being, or the thing only exists, the thing only is in that center point when it's not collapsing into two of these extremes, right? The Mobius strip has these two wild extremes that if it goes too far into one or the other, the whole thing collapses, but it stays in this, it has this center point that sutures it, that signifies. It's where signifier meets the signified. It's where it's just where actuality and experience meet up. It's being, it's this quilting point. And in a way then, for the existent object, I don't know, like this cup or like my sanity, it has to exist in this quilting point. And this is, I guess, it kind of goes directly against their idea of infinity being perpetually incomplete. Yes, I kind of see what you're saying there. Sorry, it has to exist at this quilting point, and then these extremes, to me, in a way, read as like necessary possibilities. They're just these extreme terms that we work through logically that can't sustain themselves. And it's our working through them, working through the possibilities as these spirits capable of reaching into the realm of the counterfactual and of the conceptual and of the possible, the merely possible. I can postulate about the merely possible. And with my access to the merely possible, I can recognize what aspects of a thing are necessary possibilities or are present possibilities. And those present possibilities form extremes that can't sustain themselves if I try to take that horse to market. You know, if I try to take this one extreme idea that's like, we definitely got it, and I try to run with that, I try to make that make sense, I try to say that is it, we finally found it, this totally certain thing, it collapses. Or if I try to go the other direction, say there's nothing to be found, it's all bullshit, it's all malarkey, it's all contingent, reflexive, relational, dynamic, relative, postmodern, deconstructed noise, that too collapses. And so what we have in the center, I guess, and this is where I think people might come from with their notion of Hegel as this guy who's all about, like, is it about making like some sort of concession between the two parties, like some sort of that sort of reconciliation, a compromise, this meeting in the middle of the two terms. But I think that that's not it. I think that the meeting in the middle of the two terms is where being is, and being is nothing more than the simple face of things. It's the meat. It's this is where I think Jung comes from with his idea of the tension of things that work in an alchemical process of generating matter and ideas in this tension, this dialectical. Jung's interpretation of Hegel's dialectic is this state of tension between two terms, that in their tension and in their interaction, they formulate this thing, this hard center that we can see and relate to. And that could be the masculine and the feminine or whatever, or lightness and darkness, or truth and falsehood. And they mingle together into this sort of solution in one state, in one sort of blanket experience or thing that to be understood. But I think the difference between that and this is that in Hegel's notion of the Mobius strip, it's not necessarily that those extreme terms are substantial entities in tension with each other, fighting and feeding power into this central thing between them, like two strong terms that in the center kind of meet in the middle and produce this new baby, you know, this new idea. But that it's one term. It's one term in its movement, in its extremes, and these extremes are necessary possibilities for that term to be present to me at all in my experience at the quilting point. You know what I mean? And so we try to put terms up against each other all day, and all we get are lemnisates. We're putting Mobius strips inside of and against other Mobius strips. You know what I mean? And the problem with this line of reasoning is that it's not the whole story. It's not the whole story, because this single term operating in this Mobius strip pattern, I think that it would leave us in a place of a place with no proper notion of difference or of identity between things. I think that there would just be this weird multiplicity of moving terms that are just moving around senselessly. And we wouldn't be able to talk about meaningful instances of difference or identity. And this is what Eric was kind of critiquing me on a little bit ago when I was conflating negativity and difference. But I think that the next step in the notion of the Mobius strip is to go beyond the lemnisate. The lemnisate is the Mobius strip at its extreme. It's a million Mobius strips. It's an infinitude of Mobius strips. And these Mobius strips are just things operating in a dialectical way. A term moving in a dialectical way moves in this Mobius strip pattern, but toying with extremes, falling into these necessary possibilities in our minds and in our relationships to them. And as they exist as concepts, they are moving in this way constantly. But I think that there is another factor, I guess, at work. And this is where I think Hegel's theory gets kind of meta. And it's like what is the space around that Mobius strip? What is the void within which that Mobius strip can occur? And in what way does that void around the Mobius strip, that den of the atom or whatever, you know what I mean? In what way does that give us access to the introduction of difference, to give us access to the notion of essence and things like that, or a sort of cut that interrupts the Mobius strip that was already inherent to that strip? How can I induce a cut into the strip that would already be inherent to the strip itself? And that would be the void around the strip and the cut that started the strip to begin with. And the best visual topological representation of that introduction of difference past the inside inverted 8 into essence, of a redoubled Mobius strip, in fact, is a cross cap, which is another unorientable object. But I guess my point of all this is that you take Mobius strips, you find inherent in their shape and in their function a cross cap. You take that, you find inherent in its shape and function a thing called a Klein bottle, which is another unorientable shape. And these are just tools and illustrations for understanding kind of what's going on here. And my
But if you
original
think about it,
Yeah.
if you don't mind me making an observation, tell me what you think about it. When you were talking about the processes running along the surface of the Mobius strip, I remember reading something about Einstein when supposedly he asked himself, what would the universe look like if I were riding a beam of light? And my sense is the reason why Hegel's promoting this symbol is that he's probably saying people don't realize that this is the pattern, because for so much of their life they could be, to use your metaphor or his metaphor, they could be on a part of the Mobius strip, but because of where it is on the strip with the development of ideas, it would be fairly, for lack of a better term, stable.
Yes.
Right, just because of the accidents of when they were born, what ideas they were interested in, things like that. And they wouldn't necessarily realize that, wait a second, there's going to be something that's happening in the future.
Yes, it lends itself to this notion of this stability, and it's because I think that I think that a part of the Mobius strip analogy is Hegel looking at differences versus identities, and he would say that like within the Mobius strip example, difference is a local thing and identity is like a global thing, or a universal thing. Like locally, these things are different. Locally, you're experiencing difference and you're on this journey of epistemology, or you're learning about yourself, or you're in this particular place in time with this particular culture that's telling you these particular things. But universally speaking, there's an identity between all these things, right? And we would have this just infinite series of lemnisates kind of just there, solid, stuck, frozen, right? But and I think that that's why there is this introduction of difference. And I think that the only way to get to that introduction of difference is through this modality of these Mobius strips, which he talks about in this section, which point to no way out, but only through this sort of pointing to no way out, impossible infinitude thing, can we hope to find a way out that really actually leads somewhere else. And that somewhere else is just difference. And we can talk about difference and whatever and subjectivity all day long, but this is my basic point, that there is insight in everything, in that I can investigate any term and relate to it in this way, and observe or try to apprehend or confront its dynamism or its dialectical movement or its essence or whatever. I can confront it, I can find insight in everything, but there is, at the end of the day, a modality to it that we can apprehend as unapprehendable. There is a it's like Hegel would be willing to a young girl could have like a little I don't know, like a dandelion or 3 dandelions or something. I could hold them and show them to Hegel and say, this is a princess tiara, and he would say, yes it is, my little Fräulein, and then he would be totally fine with that, right? But then one of his colleagues comes up and says, I think I found out something about immediately or imminently recognizing the in itself, and he would say, bullshit. And then he would immediately be like, that's not true. and you know it. You know, I think there's a difference between finding insight in everything and being just accepting of all possible truths. You know what I mean? Because I think that it's still founded or grounded or oriented in this recognition of the problem itself as the solution, of the problem of knowledge as knowledge, you know, things like that, I guess.
You know what,
yeah.
I frankly, I got lost, and there's a lot of your explication that I'm having a hard, that I'm not following well. But the sort of general point that I'm getting, you know, what I've actually, this reading of Hegel has prompted me in my classes to tell students that Western philosophy has a horror of change, a horror of instability. And so, you know, you look at Plato, and Plato says the phenomenal world is just flux. It's this Heraclitean flux. And that's just awful, because there's no being there. There's no being in the fullest sense. It's all becoming. There's no knowledge there. It's all just opinion. And so there must be some domain of absolute stability where being is completely stable and where knowing is completely stable. And you see that, you know, through the Western tradition, and you see it in, you know, Kant trying to relegate the weirdness to the noumena and saying, you know, you've got the transcendental ego, which creates the stability in the universe, and so you know what, kind of my takeaway from what you're saying is that Hegel is saying, like to Plato, I'm sorry, it's just all change. It's just, that's just all there is change. But, and this is where I'm sorry, but I'm having a hard time tracking with the details of your explanation. But what I'm gathering is that in the change has a structure to it, and that structure is the dialectic. And that because the constant change has this structure, then you get moments of being where these dialectical movements that are always going on create, you know, again, what you're calling the quilting point, which I again don't exactly understand, but that sort of moments of being appear within the flux because of the dialectical structure of the constant motion. So there really isn't, it really is constant change, but even though there's constant change, there are moments of being which emerge within this. That's kind of one, is that correct? And that's kind of my general takeaway.
Well, yeah, I think that's why he says that being is this place beset by antagonisms and things like that, and why he says that being is this. I think, okay, a basic way to kind of reword kind of everything I said is just I've got another attempt up my sleeve. Yes,
And just
please,
oh,
go for it.
I'm sorry. Just to
What?
say,
Yeah,
I mean,
go-
to borrow like I don't know, when he says the quilting point, Nevitt, leading into sublation would help me to understand it, or at least to get an understanding of it, is like in an object-oriented program, like the different class initialization of that structure, where the individual structure of that class and its variables and functions could be changing, and then it could be a different class, but it's its own posit in that particular point, I guess, help me in a way.
So you can, so you're saying that's yeah, I like, so you're saying you can get broader, you can expand, or you can reorient it from outside or even from inside, but as it stands, it nonetheless sustains something in this
Yes.
sort of, yes. I think that's right in line with kind of what I'm saying, I think. Ed, did you have something to say?
Think of an individual human being. Nevin and I are old guys, but we're still us, right? I mean, even though obviously we don't look like we did. Well, maybe I do look like we did when we were babies. We're going back to the, the baldness. But if you think about it, there's a sense that people have of course, there's this thing called Ed Mahawken and this thing called Nevet Rezer. And we exist for a period of time and we seem to be stable, but obviously we're growing, we're getting older, we're maturing, and then we're going through adolescence and all this, and then mature. and yet no one's going to deny that we aren't these persons, even though obviously how I am at the age of 64 is different from the way I was at 24. But there's change within the stability.
Yes, and that change is something meaningful. Like I had this teacher named Professor Hutchison, wonderful fella in this and that regard. Really boring, shitty class. But that's fine. He's never going to see this. It's epistemology, but he would always. I think that level one, yes, there's like this first level of this sort of structure of analysis, and Professor Hutchison's teaching method was a beautiful illustration of it, and it's the Mobius Strip. I think that Professor Hutchison gave me a beautiful illustration of the Mobius Strip. Yes, all about traditional logic, because he would always say, well, how do you know? How do you know that? On what grounds do you make this claim that the ultimate example of a chair is no chair at all? This is preposterous or absurd. The skeptical teacher can always ask, how do you know? How do you know? How do you know? And the concept that he's questioning inverts and reveals itself to be an empty hypothesis, right? In an epistemology class, it can always get, how do you know? How do you know? Are you sure? How do you know that for sure? And the concept goes from this rigid concept to being inverted into an empty hypothesis. And I think that the next step, or like a level 2, I think the point that one of the biggest points that I think Hegel's trying to make is that this oscillatability of the concept oscillates and reveals itself to be an empty hypothesis, because you've got a concept being confronted by a skeptical man. The skeptical man comes and says, how do you know that? How do you know it's this? How do you know it's that? And it's kind of oscillating around going, well, maybe it's not that. Maybe it's not that. I don't know. And then the Hegel's move is to say, you see that oscillatability going on right there? That's a feature of reality. This constant collapsing and saying, oh God, you're right, I guess I'm not really that. And what one might say, I guess, like Kant would say that all we've got in our reality is appearances. In our experience is appearances. And I think that Hegel would say precisely, all we've got is appearance. And this is where we will find essence as appearance, qua appearance. We get essence out of appearance. Everything is just appearance. Things in themselves are in flux and are oscillating and are unstable and inconsistent and impossible and incomplete. And so it's not just us that are failing to meet the standards set for us by this perfect world. It's that we are part of this imperfect relationship, and I think that this, I guess this imperfect relationship puts us in a place where we can say that I am skeptical of the world, but I am also able to be skeptical of myself. Thought for Hegel is not divine certainty, like in Descartes. The statement I think is open itself to skepticism. And this double skepticism into the world and into myself, this negation of negation can produce a positive. And what is that positive? I think that for Hegel, he would say that that's absolute knowing. And I think that Zizek would say that it's sex. You know what I mean? I think that it's just, or a sexy situation, maybe. I don't know. But
so I have one more question before we go. I mean, one of the things I find appealing about this is that, as you said, Hegel takes this this problem that we have with knowledge and makes it not merely an epistemological problem, but makes it an ontological problem. And says that this problem is built into the structure of reality. But so the one question I have is, so I think I understand what you're saying there. And I think that's a very interesting innovation. But is there, in addition to the sort of fractured nature of reality, is he, in addition to that, saying there is also a epistemological inability as well? So in other words, is it both epistemological and ontological, or is it only ontological, and that we do have a really perfect faculty of knowing, but when it meets up to this fractured reality, it can't grasp it? Or is it that both the knowing and the being are in some sense broken?
Wouldn't it be both for him? I mean,
That's
I would
what
say,
I'm
yeah, I mean, I would lean towards it being both. Like I mean, I don't know. I don't feel qualified to answer that, but if I was going to, I would say that for him, the ontological sense of consciousness, recognizing the flux and the infinity, retreats back into itself, and then self-consciousness interacts with reality and has this flux, and it's part of epistemology. So it's a way to take the individual state of ontological being and combine it with epistemology in the universal together.
Yeah, I think yes, and I think the way that I understand that, or the way that I think it makes sense to me, I guess, is that it's that, like, because we talk about which created which, I feel like that just depends on which side of the fence we're sitting on, and what sometimes, for a lot of people, at least in a lot of cases. But I think that what we can say is that I think that like a key part of what's going on here is not only distance from the world, but like yes, maybe actually, yeah, maybe there. Hey, I think it's not just that I'm alienated from the world, but I am also alienated from myself and from my knowing, from all my sense of knowing, all my certainty of knowledge, all of my capacity to say I think, therefore I am. Really, I think that Hegel would say, and it sounds like a joke, but he would say, I don't exactly think, so I'm not exactly. I'm not exact, or maybe I don't exactly think, therefore I'm not exactly sure what I am. But
You one time said, if I remember right, that for Hegel, the unknowability of the in itself of things, if I'm remembering this correctly, is kind of a reflection of the unknowability of the in itself of consciousness. In other words, I don't have immediate experience of whatever it is that is conscious here, and that the fact that I can't grasp the in itself of things is a reflection of that. And so is the epistemological and the ontological problem, does that mean that it's just like two sides of the same coin? That it's, the unknowability, the essential unknowability of things, and the essential unknowability of the knower are just somehow manifestations of one another, or something like that?
yes, I think that just to kind of get on with this so that we don't spend too much time lingering past 7, because I know some people, like Travis. No, I'm just kidding. That's a joke.
I have a very active social life and cannot be. Wait, I don't at all. Go ahead.
Yeah, I know. I have a function happening right now. Okay, look, I'm gonna put away the notes. Okay. Yes, I think that a way to word it would be that I am alienated to the alienation that I have to myself, the alienation that I have from myself, and the alienation that I have from the world Yeah, we are talking about Hegel on a Friday night. That's every Friday without fail, dude. The alienation that I have for myself and the alienation that I have from the world, that is a homogenous alienation. I think that there is this sort of fundamental incompleteness that grounds a lot of what's going on, that incompleteness that demands to be filled, you know. And a good way to think about this in scientific terms would be that theory that I don't know if it's string theory, where waves or strings of energy in a cosmic void struck together and caused an imbalance, like a radical imbalance, that then produced the material world, which is slowly cooling and like entropying, I don't know, and is restabilizing. And that's what Zizek said in an interview back in 2006. He's like, I think that we exist as the result of a terrible catastrophe. I think that our existence is horribly wrong and imbalanced and out of whack, and it's the only one we have, you know. And I think he's like, okay, and this is actually kind of more deep into the Zizekian logic, but he's like, what is the radical extreme of such an ontological or cosmic catastrophe? That's right, love. And that to me, when I first heard it, was, I'll say cryptic. I'll say very, very cryptic. And maybe it's good to leave on a cryptic note for this meeting. What do you guys think? I don't know.
No, that sounds good.
Love, you know.
Yeah, that was a helpful discussion. So
Yeah.
I really agree. I very, very, very much agree.
thank you.
I always enjoy this, guys. I really do. Thank you.
Me
It's
too.
really-
In spite of the fact that we can't see Travis's.
Travis, I'm
Cute
not saying,
lady.
I'm not knocking Brontes. I just thought it was trash.
I'm not talking about this is terrible literature. It's
No, I didn't enjoy it. I didn't enjoy it, but I like, I like Austin, and I did like Moby Dick. It's just the same thing with, it's just with like Tolstoy. You just maybe I'll do audit. I have a hard time if I'm like focusing on something else to hear auditory stuff. But when they go on and on, it's like Tolkien when he goes on about the linguistics of like of the elves. I'm like, please.
That's when you zone out.
Yeah, I mean, I don't ever read or listen to audiobooks or anything like that, but
Yeah.
I just can't. Like I lose it even
Are
more
you
than
a-
I do when I read. But
Are you a visual learner too? Because I find I'm a visual and audio is a little hard for me sometimes.
yeah, I like audio and visual actually. I like reading
Okay.
to myself like out loud.
Oh, cool.
Travis is a
but-
musician, so
Yeah, like I audio helps, I think, but like I don't know. I think it's the combination of doing multiple things at once sometimes that helps me stay focused.
Travis, did you get a bad haircut? That's why you're not showing your fucking face.
No, I just sometimes I don't
Hey.
like to show the camera if I'm doing something.
Privacy
to
is
comment.
fine, and you don't
Yeah.
owe anybody an explanation. That's
Yeah.
fine.
One time,
Hey,
one
thank
time,
you.
Well, speak
Travis
for
is-
yourself. That's your subjectivity. I want to know why he won't turn on his camera.
Well,
Don't
keep
speak-
wondering. You're not gonna find
one
that.
time
Travis is just rude.
Travis
Oh,
didn't turn
man.
his camera on the whole seminar, and I asked him what was that about, and he said I was killing gnats, and I felt insecure about people knowing that I was looking and killing gnats.
Yeah,
and
we
they
had a
were
really
looking-
bad gnat problem.
Yes, and he was worried people would make
Listerine.
fun of him.
Listerine works really good for that.
Yeah, I heard that.
Yeah, if you put it in a
They're
spray
good now.
bottle.
They're gone. I don't know what
Yeah,
happened.
and if it
whatever.
doesn't kill the gnats, at least they'll have better breath.
Yeah,
No,
they'll
well,
be more
you put it in
pleasant.
a spray bottle and the alcohol hits them, and it does really
No,
good.
no, teasing.
At
But
least
yeah,
they're not
Watch it.
biting.
I'm slow.
I like Wuthering Heights. I think it's a good book.
It's been a while since I've read it, man. I should probably read it. I'm just such a big Jane Austen fanboy that the Brontes kind of pissed me off.
Hey,
Yeah, I don't really know much about
Joseph.
this Bronte Austen rivalry
Jo-
that you seem to be in tune with.
Joseph, I added you on PSN, and now it's your duty to send me a message either there or on Discord as to
Oh.
your #1 Jane Austen book.
There's got to be some sort of dialectic Austin Bronte thing. So I don't know.
I think they're both. I just think they're both superseded by Dostoevsky, so I'm not going to bother.
Oh,
with
Dostoevsky.
I love
You can't
Dostoevsky
compare
too.
Russian literature to that. That's like a
That's
whole
my point. He
different arena.
supersedes them. It's like what Evan
Yeah,
said about Nietzsche ignoring Mill. Why bother?
I think
I mean,
that
it's
salsa
a
is
waste of
superseded
time.
by queso.
Queso.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
any other sort of salsa or sauces totally superseded by queso. No
Oh,
question.
are you
Agree.
guys
I want both.
in Texas? Is everybody in Texas here?
Yes.
I just want to make sure. If has anyone tried the new HEB queso where you put it in the oven and heat it for 10 minutes? Holy smokes, is it good? It's brisket, pico de gallo, and 3 different cheeses in a tin. You put it in the oven for 10 minutes, and it's like cheesy goodness. It's so good.
I have to try that.
Oh,
I'll have
Okay.
to try that.
Cool.
all right, guys.
This weekend.
Appreciate y'all.
Adios, amigos.
Goodbye.